The sound that broke Warden Thompson wasn't the blaring alarm, it was the suffocating silence that followed it. He stared, transfixed, at the monitor in his polished, silent office, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated terror. He thought he was watching a riot unfold, a predictable burst of chaos he could manage and spin. He was wrong. What he was witnessing was a reckoning, a meticulously crafted demolition, and the architect of it all was the one person he had dismissed as a ghost. That piercing alarm wasn't for an escape or a brawl, it was a signal fire. It was the sound of his corrupt, meticulously built empire crumbling to dust, brought to its knees by a woman everyone had laughed at, everyone had underestimated. His gaze was glued to the screen, but he wasn't seeing the pandemonium of the prison yard. He was seeing one woman, a corrections officer they had all derided, standing with unnerving calmness in the eye of a storm she had single-handedly unleashed. The warden's hands, usually so steady, trembled violently, rattling the papers on his desk. A strangled gasp hitched in his throat. He was frozen, not by the shock of the siren, but by the cold, horrifying, and complete realization of what had just been done to him. Before I continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, and leave your like. It helps a lot. My name is Ana Reyes. I'm 42 years old, and for the last 5 of them, I've walked the cold, unforgiving lines inside Northwood Correctional Facility. But I didn't come here for a career, for a pension, or for any of the usual reasons. I came to Northwood for a reason I kept buried so deep it barely felt real, a secret I carried like a stone in my gut. To understand how we got to that moment, to the abject terror that seized the warden's face, we have to go back 6 months. We have to go back to the day my past finally caught up with me. Section 1. The Normal World. 6 months ago, life at Northwood was a study in brutal monotony. A relentless, predictable rhythm of heavy steel doors clanging shut, the squeak of boots on polished concrete, and the low, constant hum of 1,000 men living caged lives. I wasn't anyone of importance. Not a warden, not a captain, just Officer Reyes. A number on a duty roster. I did my job with a quiet efficiency that bordered on invisibility. I kept my head down, my thoughts to myself, and I treated every inmate with the same firm, professional respect. In a place built on the currency of power and fear, my personal code was simple: fairness. You don't have to like a man to afford him his dignity. It was a simple philosophy, one that had earned me a quiet, if grudging, respect from the inmates and a certain distance from my fellow officers who preferred a more combative style. Northwood, under the administration of Warden Thompson, loved to boast about its rehabilitation programs. The crown jewel, the one he paraded in front of every visiting politician and journalist, was the prison's woodworking program. On paper, it was a resounding success. Inmates learned a valuable trade, crafting simple, sturdy furniture that was sold at a discount to state agencies and public schools. It was meant to be a symbol of redemption, a beacon of hope shining in the darkness. But like everything else at Northwood, the beautiful facade concealed a deep and pervasive rot. The woodworking shop was not a place of healing, it was a kingdom, and its king was an inmate named Marcus Thorne. Charismatic, intelligent, and radiating a confidence that was unnerving in a place like this, everyone, even the guards, called him the Monarch. Thorne wasn't just an inmate, he was an institution. He used his magnetic personality to turn the workshop into his personal fiefdom. He decided who got the best tools, the easiest assignments, the extra rations, and all the small, forbidden comforts that made life behind bars more tolerable. Thorne moved through the facility with an aura of untouchability, as if the rules were mere suggestions that didn't apply to him. And for the most part, they didn't. He was Warden Thompson's golden boy, his poster child for success. Whenever the warden needed to put on a show, he'd trot out Thorne to speak eloquently about second chances and the dignity of labor. Thorne was a master manipulator, feeding the men in suits exactly what they wanted to hear, all while masterminding the corruption that thrived just beneath the surface. I made a point to keep my distance. I worked different blocks, different shifts, anything to avoid crossing his path. I knew who he was, of course. Everyone did. I watched from afar as younger, greener officers either tiptoed around him in fear or, even worse, tried pathetically to get on his good side. I saw the extra food piled on his tray in the mess hall, the subtle upgrades to his cell, the way other inmates deferred to him. And I saw the way Warden Thompson looked at him, not like a prisoner, but like a valued asset. A tool to further his own ambitions. Warden Thompson was a man who managed by spreadsheets and public relations. He was obsessed with budgets, incident reports, and, above all, his own carefully curated reputation. To him, Northwood was not a community of human beings in need of guidance. It was a stepping stone to a bigger, better appointment. As long as the numbers looked good and the facility remained riot-free, he was content to let the inmates' brutal internal politics govern the day-to-day reality of the prison. That kind of deliberate neglect creates power vacuums, and men like Marcus Thorne are always eager to fill them. I'd seen his type before. All polished shoes and practiced smiles, but his eyes were empty. He saw what he wanted to see, a smooth running machine. He chose not to see the simmering tensions, the silent power plays, the desperate whispers. Acknowledging them would have complicated his perfect narrative. And my story? It was far more complicated than anyone knew. I wasn't just counting down the days to retirement. I was here on a vigil. I was here because Marcus Thorne, the charismatic king of Northwood, was my younger brother. 5 years ago, a stupid, tragic mistake had landed him a long sentence, and in a desperate, misguided act of familial duty, I had transferred here. I thought I could watch over him, be a quiet influence, a reminder of the good person he once was. But the boy I knew was gone, replaced by the calculating man they called the monarch. He never acknowledged me, and I never acknowledged him. We were strangers, bound by a secret that was eating me alive. That simple, desperate hope is what made me a target. I wouldn't play their game, so they decided to make a game out of me. Section 2. The inciting incident and rising action. It all fractured on a Tuesday, a day like any other. I was covering an extra shift in the main yard, a rare assignment that placed me directly in my brother's world. He was holding court by the basketball hoops, the center of gravity for his crew. As I made my rounds, my eyes fell on a new inmate, a kid no older than 20, looking utterly lost and terrified. My training kicked in, but so did something else, a pang of sympathy. I stopped, spoke to him in a low voice, and pointed him toward the library. It was a simple act of decency. A nothing moment. But Marcus saw it. And in his kingdom, nothing was a nothing moment. As I walked away, his voice, laced with contempt, echoed across the concrete yard. Look at old Saint Anna, trying to save the new fish. Hey, officer. You lose your nerve. Decided to be a counselor instead of a guard. His crew erupted in laughter. It's a classic inmate tactic, public mockery to chip away at an officer's authority. I'd seen it 100 times. The standard response is to either ignore it or bark a reprimand. But this was different. This was personal. This was my brother, aiming a dart directly at my heart. I stopped, turned slowly, and kept my face a blank mask of professionalism. I met his eyes across the yard. In them, I saw no flicker of recognition, no shared history, only cold amusement. I didn't say a word. I just held his gaze for a long, painful moment before continuing my patrol. In prison, silence can be a weapon. But to Marcus, my silence was weakness. He had thrown a punch, and I hadn't swung back. High above, in the control tower, Warden Thompson was observing the yard. I saw his silhouette against the tinted glass. He saw the entire exchange. And then, I saw him turn away, a small, dismissive gesture that spoke volumes. It was a silent endorsement. He had just signaled to Marcus, and to everyone else watching, that Officer Reyes was fair game. That was the first crack in the dam. The mockery, now sanctioned from the top, became a relentless, orchestrated campaign. It was subtle at first. Whispers and snickers that ceased the moment I turned my head. My keys would vanish from the duty board, only to mysteriously reappear minutes later. They started calling me Counselor Anna, the name dripping with sarcasm. It was all a sophisticated psychological game designed to wear me down, to isolate me, to provoke a reaction. The goal was to paint me as unstable, as soft, and get me to do something that would end my career. I followed protocol. I reported the first few incidents, documenting them in detail. The reports disappeared without a trace. I spoke to my captain, a man worn down by the system. He just sighed, refusing to meet my eyes. Anna, you know how it is. Thompson protects Thorne. Just keep your head down. Ride it out. But writing it out was impossible. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to break. Then, it escalated. One afternoon, I returned to my locker in the staff room to find the door pried open. Nothing was stolen, but sitting on my folded uniform was a small, exquisitely carved wooden bird, a canary. It was carved from maple, the same wood as the tree we had in our childhood backyard, the one Marcus fell out of and broke his arm. The message was brutally clear and deeply personal. A canary sings. A snitch. They were crafting a narrative that I was an informant, the most dangerous label anyone can have in a prison, for guards and inmates alike. This was his move, a cruel twist of a shared memory. The tactic worked. Some of my colleagues, already wary of my quiet nature, began to actively avoid me. The loneliness was a physical weight. A divided staff is a weak staff, and my brother knew exactly what he was doing. I knew complaining to the warden was a dead end. In the closed, insular world of corrections, reporting on your superiors is professional suicide. I'd seen good officers buried under mountains of bogus internal investigations for daring to speak out. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. So, I stopped reporting. And I started watching. I'm a creature of habit. My life, both in and out of uniform, is built on noticing details others miss. It's what kept me safe. Now, I turned that intense focus onto Marcus Thorne and his corrupt kingdom. I started spending my breaks in the dim observation rooms overlooking the workshop, a silent spectator behind one-way glass. I volunteered for overtime, taking the lonely late-night shifts that put me near the loading docks. I became a ghost, haunting the periphery of his operation. And the more I watched, the more I saw things that didn't add up. If you're still here with me, don't forget to subscribe, activate notifications, leave your like, and share this video with someone. The first discrepancy was the wood. Every week, a delivery truck would arrive with a load of premium hardwood, rich mahogany, dark walnut, lustrous cherry. I started quietly photocopying the delivery manifests. They listed thousands of board feet of this expensive lumber. But the furniture being shipped out of Northwood, the desks and chairs destined for schools? That was all cheap, low-grade pine, stained to look more expensive. I saw those deliveries arriving separately, on different, unmarked trucks that came and went at odd hours. So where was all that beautiful, expensive hardwood going? Then I started noticing the weights. Using a quiet contact in the transport office, I began logging the official weigh station records for the outgoing trucks. The manifests for the finished pine furniture listed one number, but the certified axle weights of the trucks leaving the gate were significantly heavier. They were heavier because they were double-stacked, loaded with raw, priceless planks of mahogany and walnut, carefully concealed beneath a top layer of cheap pine desks. This was no simple scam. This was a sophisticated, large-scale criminal enterprise. It required fraudulent manifests, complicit drivers, and, most critically, someone on the inside with enough power to guarantee no one ever looked too closely. The final, devastating piece of the puzzle fell into place one evening in the quiet of the town library. On my day off, I reviewed copies of the shipping destinations I'd managed to acquire. The official deliveries of pine furniture went to the state, as expected. But the unofficial shipments, the ones I could only track through whispers and furtive glances at drivers' private logs, were all routed to a single address, a private company named Oak Creek Furnishings. A little research told me everything I needed to know. Oak Creek was a boutique furniture company specializing in high-end, artisanal pieces. Their website boasted about using the finest imported hardwoods. Their prices were astronomical. And the registered owner, the man getting rich off stolen government property, was David Thompson, Warden Thompson's brother-in-law. The whole rotten picture snapped into focus with sickening clarity. This was never my brother's scam. It was the warden's. Marcus was just the inside man, the foreman. In exchange for running the operation, he was granted power, perks, and absolute protection. He was allowed to rule his block and mock me into oblivion because he was making the warden's family rich. The daily harassment, the humiliation, the psychological warfare, it wasn't just about his ego. It was a calculated strategy to discredit me, to paint me as unstable, so that if I ever stumbled upon the truth, no one would believe me. A cold, hard anger settled in my gut, displacing the grief. This wasn't about disrespect anymore. This was about a deep, systemic corruption that was poisoning the very institution I was a part of. But intertwined with that anger was a profound sense of guilt. My brother, the boy I came here to save, was at the heart of it. Exposing the warden meant exposing Marcus, condemning him to a fate far worse than his current sentence. For days, I was paralyzed by a moral dilemma that tore me apart. I sat in my small apartment, staring at the evidence, a photo of us as children on my nightstand. Did I have the right to destroy what was left of his life, even to serve a greater good? They had all underestimated me. They saw a quiet, aging officer. They didn't see the woman who had spent 5 years learning every shadow, every echo, every rule, and every loophole of this place. And they didn't see the sister who was now forced to make an impossible choice. I couldn't go to internal affairs. Not yet. I needed more than photocopies and a well-founded hunch. I needed undeniable, irrefutable proof. I had to catch them in the act, in their own words. I purchased a small, department-approved digital audio recorder. I began carrying it with me on every shift, always on, always recording. The battery lasted 12 hours. Men like my brother, men who feel untouchable, grow arrogant. They love to brag. His ego, I realized, was his greatest weakness. I waited. I walked my beat. I endured the taunts. "Hey, Counselor Anna, have you saved any souls today?" I'd just nod. "Still breathing, Thorn," I'd reply, my voice flat, and move on. All the while, the tiny recorder in my breast pocket was capturing every word, every whisper, every laugh. And then I got it. It was a Thursday night. Marcus was in the workshop overseeing a late shipment, speaking with his second-in-command, a lifer named Rico. They believed they were alone, standing near a large ventilation shaft that connected to a utility corridor I was patrolling. Their voices carried perfectly. "That sister of yours is getting on my nerves," Rico grumbled. "Officer Reyes. She's always watching." Marcus's laugh was low and cocky, the sound of it a knife in my heart. "Let her watch. She's a ghost. Thompson said the old-timer is just bitter about her career. What's she gonna do, file another report? Thompson shreds them. Anna thinks we're just making cabinets. She has no idea about the deal with Oak Creek, no idea the warden gets a 50% cut. The crazier she looks, the safer we are. Let my dear sister watch. She's our insurance policy." I stood motionless in the darkness, my heart pounding against my ribs. I had it. His voice, clear as day, laying out the entire conspiracy. Admitting the warden's direct involvement. Admitting he knew I was his sister and was using me. It wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was a fact, saved on a tiny memory card. The mockery had been their greatest mistake. They pushed me, so I pushed back by looking deeper. And in doing so, they handed me the very weapon I needed to tear their entire world down. A plan began to form in my mind, not a plan of violence, but of quiet, devastating, surgical precision. They wanted a reaction. They were about to get one. Section 3. The Climax and Aftermath. I chose my day with surgical precision, the annual State Correctional Oversight Committee's inspection. It was the single most important day of the year for Warden Thompson, a day of elaborate dog and pony shows, gleaming floors, and manufactured smiles. The prison was spotless, the inmates were on their best behavior, and the warden was in his element, soaking in the praise. Their final stop was always his pride and joy, the woodworking shop. I had arranged my shift to be on duty in the workshop that afternoon. 2 days earlier, I'd made a single, anonymous phone call to a man in the state's Office of Internal Affairs, a man I knew had a reputation for integrity. I didn't give my name. I simply told him to ensure he was on the inspection tour at Northwood, to bring a digital forensics kit, and to be in the warden's main monitoring room at exactly 3 p.m. I told him a major security breach was imminent and that the warden's server and shipping logs constituted critical evidence. I gave him one code word: canary. It was a long shot, but I was betting on his curiosity and my brother's cruel little gift. At 2:55 p.m., the warden, beaming with pride, led the committee into the workshop. Marcus was front and center, ready for his performance. He was demonstrating how to craft a perfect dovetail joint, his voice smooth and professional. He glanced over at me, standing by the far wall, and a contemptuous smirk played on his lips. This was his stage. He paused his demonstration, turning his attention to the committee but directing his words at me. "Of course," he said, his voice ringing with false sincerity, "the most important tool in any workshop is a positive attitude. Something a few of our older officers seem to have misplaced. Isn't that right, Counselor Anna?" His crew chuckled on cue. The committee members shifted uncomfortably. Warden Thompson shot me a look of pure, unadulterated fury. A look that screamed, "You are ruining my perfect day." This was the moment. The culmination of 6 months of humiliation, investigation, and agonizing moral debate. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move a muscle. I just looked directly at my brother, Marcus Thorne, and spoke in a calm, conversational tone that cut through the noise of the shop. "That's an interesting point, Marcus. But I have a quick question for you about materials. I was just wondering, does the warden's brother-in-law at Oak Creek Furnishings prefer walnut or mahogany? Because the official state manifest only lists pine." The hum of the machinery seemed to die instantly. The air in the room went thick and heavy. Everyone, absolutely everyone, froze. Marcus's arrogant smirk evaporated, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of shock. The color drained from his face. He looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. Warden Thompson went rigid. His practiced smile vanished, his face becoming a ghastly, pale mask of horror. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I kept going, my voice as steady as a rock, though my heart was breaking. "And the shipping weights. It's funny, isn't it? How a truck full of pine desks weighs 10,000 pounds on the manifest, but the certified axle weight says it's closer to 15,000. That's a lot of extra weight. Almost as if there were, say, 5,000 pounds of raw mahogany hidden underneath." Marcus's eyes darted around the room, frantically searching for an escape, for an ally. He looked at the warden, a desperate, silent plea in his eyes. But the warden couldn't help him. He was just staring at me, his face a cocktail of disbelief and raw, primal terror. Then, the final blow. The words that would sever our bond forever. "But I guess you already explained it all, Marcus. I have a recording. From last Thursday. You and Rico. You talked about the deal with Oak Creek. You talked about the warden's 50% cut. I held up the small digital recorder for all to see. You even talked about me. Your sister. How I was your insurance policy. You were right about one thing. I was watching. But you were so wrong about what I was seeing." A collective gasp swept through the room. The committee members were no longer looking at the fine woodworking. They were staring, mouths agape, at Warden Thompson. From my pocket, I pulled a small remote trigger and pressed the button. Across the entire facility, a high-pitched, piercing alarm began to blare. Not the fire alarm, not the riot alarm. It was the major security breach alarm, a unique alert I knew would automatically lock down the administration building and dispatch every senior officer directly to the warden's office. It was exactly 3 p.m. On the large monitor mounted in the workshop, we all saw it happen in real time. My contact from Internal Affairs, hearing the specific alarm and my code word over the comms, moved instantly. He and 2 other investigators stepped into the warden's office, declared it an active crime scene, and began securing the computers and servers. That was the moment from the beginning of this story. The moment Warden Thompson truly froze. He was watching his own spectacular downfall on a television screen, utterly helpless. He finally understood, in that horrifying instant, that he had been completely and irrevocably outmaneuvered. This wasn't a riot. It was a surgical strike. He hadn't been overthrown by violence or chaos. He had been dismantled by information, by the quiet diligence of the one person he never saw coming. After that, the entire house of cards collapsed with breathtaking speed. The inspection was immediately suspended and transformed into a full-blown criminal investigation, with the committee members serving as primary witnesses. Warden Thompson was silently escorted off the property by state investigators, his face gray and vacant, the face of a man who had lost everything in the span of 5 minutes. For Marcus Thorne, my brother, the fall was even harder. His empire, built entirely on the warden's protection, vanished in an instant. The inmates who had once followed him like a prophet now looked at him with nothing but contempt. He was no longer a king. He was just another convict, one who had brought the full weight of the state down on all of them. Before the week was out, He was transferred to a supermax facility hundreds of miles away, his kingdom reduced to an empty concrete box. As they led him away in chains, our eyes met for one final, fleeting moment. There were no words, just a vast, silent ocean of regret, betrayal, and loss. The woodworking scam was blown wide open. The forged manifests, the weight logs, and my recording formed the unshakable backbone of a case that led to over a dozen arrests, from the warden and his brother-in-law to the shipping employees on the outside, and the weeks that followed, a strange, unfamiliar quiet settled over Northwood. The oppressive tension was gone. The open secret of the corruption had been lanced like a boil, and for the first time in years, the place could actually begin to heal. I spent hours with internal affairs, walking them through everything, handing over my meticulous notes, the stacks of photocopies, and the small digital recorder that had started it all. They offered me a promotion, a commendation, a quiet desk job far from the front lines. I turned it all down. That was never what this was about. I went back to being Officer Reyes. I walked my beat. I did my job. The inmates looked at me differently now. Not with fear, but with a kind of baffled, profound respect. The mockery was gone, replaced by a wide berth. They understood what I was now, not a person to be trifled with. Not because I was violent or cruel, but because I was patient. Because I was always watching. I learned a hard lesson about true power. It isn't about who shouts the loudest or hits the hardest. It's not found in swagger and intimidation. True power is found in seeing what others miss, in understanding that every empire, no matter how strong it appears, is riddled with cracks in its foundation. And sometimes, all it takes is one person, quietly and persistently tapping in just the right place, to bring the whole rotten structure crashing down. They thought I was a ghost. But a ghost sees everything. And now, I am a ghost, haunted by the memory of the brother I came to save, and the man I had to destroy. Thank you for listening to my story. Please subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, leave your like, and share this video with others.